Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to QGTV. Today we're on day 15, which is the halfway mark of Ramadan 2011, and we'll be doing two chapters, which are chapter 24 and chapter 25, An-Nur and Al-Furqan. Let's begin with An-Nur. An-Nur is a chapter which begins very uniquely, and it says, Surah. أنزلناها وفرضناها وأنزلنا فيها آيات بينات لعلكم تذكرون. A surah which we descended it and we made it obligatory, and we descended in it clarifying ayat, clarifying signs, لعلكم, that you may verify. So here we can see that it talks about a surah. In chapter 28, verse 85, it says Al-Quran is a surah. So Al-Quran refers to the current recitation which you are reading, and that is a surah. A surah is a coherent discourse. So in the same way, from Bismillah to Bismillah is also a surah, because it is a coherent discourse. It's something which links to one another, and it makes a bracelet of information. If you like, if you imagine a bracelet, it has links, and the end and the beginning connect. I believe that all information from Bismillah to Bismillah are surahs. Then An-Nur continues by talking about unrecognized sexual relations. That's from verse 2 to verse 20. An-Nur talks about zina, and zina are relations which are not recognized. They are not given the nikah, and also blaming people who are chaste, or blaming your own spouse is prohibited and given a due punishment as well. So here the opening of An-Nur is about social relations, sexual relations to be exact, to build a society where everything is recognized. Next we come to the first call, which is the call to the believers, those who have already believed in this law in the zina section, which is from verse 2 to verse 20. Allah says, do not follow the footsteps of shaitan. Why is this the case? Well, shaitan commands with fahsha and munkar. Fahsha is injustice, simply because if you have sexual relations which are hidden or illicit, basically you are being unjust to society and the people you are with. Also, shaitan commands with munkar. Munkar is something which is not recognized, it's not known. People do not officially recognize it, and this is something which is prohibited. So once again, An-Nur talks about social laws. Next we come to verse 27, which is another call, this time about privacy, and we are told not to enter into houses until we have actually have permission and saluted those who are in them. So here we can see that Muslims are not people who barge into spaces for which they have not had permission. Then in the same passage it talks about the mu'mineen and mu'minat. So the believing men and believing women, how they are to conduct themselves in such a way that I would say their sexuality and their charms are not compromised. Then we come to at the end in verse 34, it says that وَلَقَدْ أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكُمْ آيَاتٍ مُبَيِّنَاتٍ. So earlier we see ayatun bayyinat, here we have ayatun mubayyinat. So bayyinat is probably something which you can see and is apparent, but mubayyinat explains those verses. So we come to that's verse 34. Then we come to the very famous verse, the mystical verse of the light. Right, next we come to the famous verse of the light. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. Why is this verse placed here? Well, I believe that if you were to connect the dots, yeah, connect the bit about sexual relations which are unrecognized, that would lead to chaos in society. Then you have privacy and marrying people off, so that everyone is stabilized. I believe that leads to Allah, the so-called meeting with Allah, liqa Allah. That happens when everything is regulated, and it continues. The verse of the light is often quoted in isolation, and that's not right, because the next verse, it talks about in houses which Allah has permitted to be raised for the vivification of Allah's names. And so tasbih can be held for his names. So tasbih is the harmonized movement which the universe is engaged in. So this is exactly how society is supposed to be. And these are independent people whom traffic nor merchandise can divert them from the vivification of Allah. So that's from verses 35 to 38. Next we move on to the opposite state, which is the state of those who conceal. That's from verse 39 to 40. So these people are the opposite of those who elevate Allah, who raise Allah's names. Next we move on to another interesting verse. I mean, this chapter has actually 3 verses which are given names. And the first one is Ayatul Nur, we saw it. This is Ayatul Tayr, the verse of the bird. And we'll come to another one, Ayatul Istikhlaf. The 3 verses here are given special names by Muslims, not by Allah, but by Muslims. So we have verse 41. Verse 41 talks about the salat and tasbih, which each creature actually knows. Yeah, so it says, Alam tara anna Allah yusabbihu lahu man fis samawati wal ard. Do you not see those who are doing the tasbih, that harmonized movement among the ones in the heavens and the earth? And the word man there, man, it's not ma. Man means who rather than what. So this is talking about human beings in a metaphorical sense. And it says, Kullu qad alima salatahu wa tasbihahu. Each of them know their salat and tasbih. So salat and tasbih are your connectivities with Allah and your harmonized movement to reach towards Allah. So each of us must know this. And then it says, وَلِلَّهِ مُلْكُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So then it talks about the dominion of Allah. So salat and tasbih are to reach that dominion where Allah becomes our ruler. Right, next we move on to verse 47, which talks about those who obey and those who believe in Allah and the Messenger and they obey. So this is another salient theme in An-Nur, which is obedience to the Messenger. Once again, we have not seen something like this. We have not seen something like this in chapters from way back to chapter 8 and 9. So chapter 8 and 9, yes, there are plenty of obediences to the Messenger. All the way up to this chapter, we've not seen anything much like that. But this chapter really focuses on it. And it says, وَيَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِاللَّهِ وَبِالرَّسُولِ وَأَطَعْنَا. And we believe in Allah and in the Messenger and we obey. So from verse 47 all the way to verse 54, including verses which are quite famous, such as verse 51, which says, إِنَّمَا كَانَ قَوْلَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Verily the answer or the saying of the believers, إذا دعوا إلى الله ورسوله, when called to Allah and His Messenger, ليحكم بينهم, that they may be judged between them, أن يقولوا سمعنا وأطعنا, they say we hear and we obey. وأولئك هم المفلحون. So the ruling of the messenger, that the messenger who has vivified the message, that's why he's called the Rasul, he has vivified the message, he is the personification of the message. So the believers recognize this and they move towards this, and that is why they say we hear and we obey. This is the ruling of Allah and the messenger, and I do believe that this entire chapter will give us that system of rule, at least one of the chapters, because this is one of the chapters, because chapter 33, which we will come to in the next few days, also has a strong theme which is similar to this. Right, so this brings us to ayat Istiqlaf, or verse 55 of An-Nur, where Allah has promised those who believe and work righteous deeds that they will be given what is known as Istikhlaf fil ard, which means a succession in the land, and He will establish for them their deen. So the laws, and we're not just talking about the legal sphere, but also the metaphysical and socio-economic sphere, that will be established for them. And this is, I think, it's crucial to note why this is in this chapter An-Nur, because here in the beginning we saw a series of social norms. Obviously the Quran is full of them, but the ones here may contribute to this particular state. Anyway, it continues in verse 56. It says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. So establish as-salat. So as-salat here are the actions, the corrective actions, Amalus Saleh mentioned in verse 55, which will bring about that state. And wa'atu zakat is the growth you will experience through doing that. Wa'ati'u rasul. So as we've seen in the previous passage, verse 47 to 54, it talks about the mechanics of obeying the messenger, and here it reminds us again, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, that you may have growth, or God may evolve you. You know, turhamun, raham. It's like being in a womb state. So there you go. That is verse 55 and 56. Then we move on to a few more social laws from verse 58 to 61, which talks about times of privacy, as well as entering houses once again. And the chapter wraps up back to obedience of the messengers. It says in verse 62, only the believers are those who believe in Allah and His Messenger and with Him on a matter requiring collective action. They do not depart unless they ask for His leave. So here we see the utmost obedience to the messenger, and the messenger is the personification of the message. That's why he's called the Rasul. A Risala is the message. He is the Rasul, so he is the personification of the message. And the last ayah says, do not treat the summons of the apostle, or the call of the apostle, as you would calls between yourselves. So he is of a higher status. And that's how the chapter closes. So here we can see in An-Nur, it is a series of social laws peppered or interspersed with various processes which the believers experience. I do believe that this is a very hard chapter. As I said before, hard here means that it does not deal with any kind of descriptive situations like Judgment Day, etc. No, this is down to earth, right here. This is your set of actions, and this is essentially the government of Allah and His Messenger. So we'll move on now to chapter 25.